and welcome to What's Possible, Conversations with World-Class Coaches. Today, I am delighted to have my friend and SBC coach here, Sherry Fisher. Welcome, Sherry.
Hi, Eileen. It's very nice to be here.
Always fun when we get to have a good conversation. We decided to have this conversation today because Sherry was presenting to a team of our coaches on something completely unrelated. And then she brought up the topic of procrastination. And all of our ears kind of perked up because procrastination is something everybody deals with at some time. I don't think I've met one leader, one friend, family member who hasn't procrastinated on something at some point. And Sherry kind of turned that on her head, as Sherry always does. And she said, what if we looked at procrastination through a more self-compassionate lens? And so that's what we're going to be playing with today. And before I fully get started with that, Sherry is a MAP grad. So she went to the University of Pennsylvania School in positive psychology, which many of our coaches have graduated from that program. And she also is a learning development specialist and then wrote a phenomenal book called The Effort Myth. So before we go further, will you show your copy of The Effort Myth since mine is downstairs? There we go. And will you read the tagline under it too for people?
Oh, it says how to give your child the 3 gifts of motivation. But a child could really be anybody who you are helping, not just a young person. Because by the time you get to the end of the book, everything in there applies to an adult. So it kind of walks you through. But the couple things, one is on the back, it says no one should have to suffer to be able to learn. And I feel that really strongly for anybody. So if you are struggling, there is no need. We can make that better.
I love that. And to your point, Sherry, with that book is so applicable to adults. We've had Sherry meet with our HR partners, and they all went home with Sherry's book and the rave reviews that I get from them. And then we also offer programs that Sherry leads to working with leaders from this next generation, because I think there's that generational gap sometimes between senior leadership and the upcoming kind of generations of new employees. And so Sherry has been really involved with how do you bridge that gap in a really impactful way where there is mutual understanding. So that's another area where Sherry has leveraged her education, background, experience, and overall talents. So again, Sherry, I'm thrilled that you're here. And before we jump in, this is going to sound super obvious, but will you give a definition for procrastination? What's your working definition so we can be on the same field as we entertain our conversation?
Okay. So I would say that for me, procrastination just means that you're not doing something that you think you ought to be doing. So you're putting it off, and it may be something you're putting off for who knows what reason. It's just the putting off of that thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means or doesn't mean, and how to figure it out, how to make it not be such a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So a putting off of a thing, do you always have to have, would you say that a thing that you want, or not necessarily? Can it, for example, for me, kind of balancing my QuickBooks might be something that, that I procrastinate on. I don't really want to do it. So do you use procrastination only in the context of things you really want, or in general?
So let's just take yours as an example. Something that you don't get great joy out of is a lot easier to push off. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Something that you choose not to do because, not just because as a whole thing, you don't get joy from it. So like balancing your QuickBooks, that's like it's not like you're just going to go in there and do it very quickly. It's not just like you're going to dash it off. Some things people put off because they're like, oh, it's no big deal. I'll get to it later. It's a little thing. Other things that people procrastinate about are giant things that are overwhelming. And they're like, oh, I don't have the time for this. So you would think that those would be different things, but they're coming from the same place, which we're going to talk about in a little bit.
Yeah, let's dive in there, because you and I have talked a bit about this before the show on that whole I don't have time. And Many of us feel like we're going from meeting to meeting to meeting, and I truly don't have time. But you have a different perspective on this. So share what your perspective is on procrastinating and that whole idea of the only reason I'm not doing it is just it's a time issue.
Well, so I will say flat out, all procrastination is emotional. It's not about time management. The reason you're procrastinating has to do with how you feel about something. It's not really because of how much time you have or don't have, because there are plenty of people we know who can just get that thing done, or who can make the slog as long as it takes. They can spend 8 hours, working on their taxes or whatever thing that we were thinking, the 27th ring of hell. I don't want to go there. So we need to pay attention to the emotion that's pushing us to do or not do the thing that we are procrastinating about. It's not about time management. You won't necessarily get better just because you time box it in your. I've been quoted as saying that time boxing is a good thing, which I would say it is, but only if you also know how to be tuned into how you're feeling about things. So back to the idea of the balancing your books. If you really don't want to do it, you could decide that you could give that job to somebody else, and then that would free up your time. But that won't change how you feel about doing it. That just might change who does the actual job. So it's important for you to notice that you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's also important for you to notice if you hear yourself saying, I'll probably do it. Because probably is not a commitment. Probably is a maybe. And every time you say you'll probably do something, you are giving yourself a chance to probably not do it.
Yeah, it gives you an escape route.
That's right.
Yep. Yeah. So let's use something practical that's come up a lot amongst our coaches. And so I rarely give our coaches as examples. We often tap into kind of client issues, but I'm going to call out our coaches. There are so many on our team and other colleagues of mine, even who aren't on our team, who say, I really want to be writing more. And I've been procrastinating on getting my blog articles done or my book written or whatever it is. And it's often around this writing issue. So when you talk about emotion, can you give some specifics of what somebody might be able to think about if, whether it's one of our listeners, it's a writing issue for them, or they can plug in their own issue. But let's use this to kind of play around with and talk about where those emotions come in and what do you do with it?
So I like the one about writing because many people don't think they're good at writing, or they don't think that they have enough time to write something good, and therefore they put it off. But one of the things you can find out for yourself about a task that you don't really like, that you want to do it. You want to make yourself want to do it. There are ways of want to do something that are punitive. Like, you give your friend $100 and they get to keep it if you don't do the thing. So you're incentivizing yourself by getting your $100 back. I want to write, and I want my $100 back.
Sure.
But I would say that would not work for me. So, and lots of people don't want to lose the money, but that doesn't make them want to write. It only makes them not want to lose the money. Right. So how can you do that a different way is notice when you have a good idea. If you have a good idea and you have a way of writing it down, maybe you put it in a note on your phone, maybe you have a journal, someplace where you keep track of your good ideas. Also, go back to something that you've written before. Maybe there's one sentence in there that stands out. And that sentence, when you read it, is energizing and you're like, yes. Or you say, oh, that was really good what I did there. When you hear yourself saying to yourself that you've done something good, or that you made a good point, or you said it well, or you say, oh, I could say this even better. Even one sentence that will get you started will make you feel better, is going to change your mood. So you want to be a mood manager. You don't just want to be a timekeeper, and you don't want to be setting things up so that other people will punish you if you're bad, because that's not going to make you like writing and make you want to do it anymore.
Yeah. I really love that. And I love the mood manager, because it is, when you think about it, when we're in a place where you want to either crawl out of your skin, or you feel like you've been running from thing to thing, that's probably not the time to sit down and say, now's the time I need to sit and write, versus being able to really get yourself to a place where you feel inspired. And to that point, I was on a call yesterday, a writing call with a colleague who we both said, let's sit for an hour and write. So we started the call, and at first I was thinking I need to go through a few emails that I haven't answered. So I started procrastinating right out of the gate. And I'm like quickly checking the emails and responding, getting those off. And then I just sat there and I thought, okay, you've done the stuff that you have to clear the decks for. You are here to write. And so I did exactly what you said, which is interesting. I pulled up an old piece that I had started and not finished. And I started reading and I'm like, I actually kind of like this piece. You know what? I'm going to tweak this. I want to add here. And by the end of literally, we had an hour block together. I probably not wasted, but got stuff off my work desk for about 20 minutes. And then I had 40 minutes and I revised and concluded the article and was done. And I felt mood-wise, I was super excited to do it. So case in point.
Yes, that was very good. When you are managing your mood, you're making it possible to also to access your creativity. It's hard to be, if you're feeling very, very anxious, it can be easy to be generating lots and lots of ideas, but you might not be in the mood to stop and write them down. So this brings up a related part of this. You may find that you are a person who writes best at a certain time of day. You might find that you manage your mood best after coffee in the morning. I have 3 dogs. I get up at 5:00 because that's when they wake up. And the first thing I do after we all come back inside is I hit the button to make the coffee go. And I get my coffee and I sit down. If I decide I'm going to start by, answering email or whatever, that's going to eat that time. But the dogs are happy and well fed and well exercised. And I have my coffee, and that's when I will go through and start writing things. Even starting something is better than not. I was once going to write a book, which I might write one day, called If You Act Now. And that was my procrastination book, my title. If You Act Now. Because what if you don't? So sometimes you don't. That's what probably is all about. I'll do it maybe tomorrow. Probably. So maybe it's not good enough, right? You know better. So you say probably. Probably sounds so good. I work with clients and they say probably a lot. And I just call it the probably problem. And people learn to listen for that. So you did great. You said, I'll probably answer these emails first.
And then I got them out. And then there's the ironic thing of it, the article was on accountability. I had accountability to the person on the other side too. And I think accountability can also play into procrastination, right? Because you've got that camaraderie of we're both doing something that we are expecting the other person's doing. So it's following through. So when we get to the other end of the call, we can share our success or our challenges.
Yes. So that's another thing that's interesting. So when you are being accountable because somebody else is there with you, that's not the same thing as being responsible. Being responsible is you have a job and you need to get your job done.
Sure.
Being accountable means that somebody else is involved. And when you add another person, that person might be, your boss, and you have to be accountable because otherwise, it's going to go down. But instead of that, if you think about being accountable as having some shared responsibility, it makes responsibility nicer, and you're more interested in, which is exactly what you were describing, is that you were sharing your responsibility. You had a part, your colleague had a part, and together you both wrote, and then you had something to share. Very nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, there's so much good stuff in what you're talking about. One thing made me think about Barb Fredrickson's work on Broaden and Build and positive emotions. And I think that's what you're tapping into is when we can get in that state, and then we can think of more of, to name our show, what's possible. All of a sudden your brain starts to go to what's possible as opposed to being stuck in procrastination and just kind of, I think of it as being in almost like quicksand sometimes.
And Barb Fredrickson has a great list there, like the 10 positive emotions that are most common. And one of them is relief. So procrastination is your brain's way of letting you think thoughts to give your feelings relief. You're like, I can't do it right now. I'll do it later. I'll probably do it tomorrow. Right. So that is exactly what that is. You're giving yourself a little bit of positive emotion, but you can learn to listen to that and use the positive emotion as an awareness time for when you can actually say, oh, I feel better now. You can become relieved much more easily if you recognize that that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and all of that weaves in what you're talking about is procrastination and self-compassion and how that comes together. Do you want to dive a little bit deeper into, where self-compassion is important in this whole mix?
Well, I think if we realize that when we're not being self-compassionate, that's when you say, I should be, I need, all the things that give you extra jobs to do in life and layer pressure. And you're not just having to be accountable anymore. Now you have to be accountable and perfect. And whatever, you could be a person who has many different roles that you're playing, and you have to be perfect at all of those things. And sometimes with self-compassion, we're trying to get people to think, oh, I just need to give myself a break and some kindness. Kindness is nice. Don't get me wrong. But if you're procrastinating, you also need to be self-aware so that you can be kind to yourself. So the first and most important part is the awareness, not just I'm a procrastinator. You give yourself a label. That doesn't sound very good. You could change it up and say, I'm a person who procrastinates. Procrastination is difficult for me. You could change the language, but at the end of the day, the most important part is that you recognize what is motivating you to be procrastinating at any given time. And if you're being motivated to procrastinate because something's hard for you, then you have some choices. You can add some things. You can add some structure so it's easier for you to do. You can self-advocate, ask people to help you or delegate. You can improve your time awareness. How long do things take? Lots of times. This is one of my very favorite things. And all clients love this, is I give them 5 minutes. So tell me, how long do you estimate it will take you to do such and such? And I set the timer for 5 minutes, 5 minutes only. And they're amazed at how much can be done in 5 minutes when they're just focused on whatever the thing is. Even if it's a 5-hour project, the 5 minutes, and then we just reset, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. At the end of a half an hour, they have had their resets for those 5-minute times, and they actually have something to show for the time that they put in. And that's very motivating. So you don't have to commit to the entire task. You only have to commit to 5 minutes and 5 more minutes and 5 more minutes, a little bit at a time. So it's not overwhelming, and that you can feel that you've done something good. And also you can be kind to yourself that way. It's much more compassionate than saying, I'll never be able to do this, which is beating yourself up, little victimizer, telling you bad things about yourself, right?
Yeah, well, and I love that because it gives you that dopamine hit every 5 minutes. It gives your brain that reward consistently throughout versus, that self-regulation of I need to wait until I've been sitting here for 2 hours, which we know is not the most productive, effective way to work.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. Much better to make little successes that are eventually going to turn into whatever it is you want to accomplish. It's also, the dopamine idea is really helpful. You're getting small rewards or small wins. And it also is calming, because when you're working for 5 minutes, at the end of that 5 minutes, when you just reset your timer to keep on going, I watch people do this. The first 5 minutes, the first time they ever do it, they think nothing's going to get accomplished, and they kind of want to show me up, right? This isn't really going to work. And at the end of the first 5 minutes, I just quietly say to them, would you like 5 more? And everybody says yes. Right? Yes, I need 5 more. And you give them 5 more, and a half an hour goes by, they don't realize, but then when they see what they produced, it's pretty amazing. And they're able to say great things to themselves with a little bit of coaching. So what was the best thing about that? Well, I had no idea how much I could get done. That sounds really good. What do you think about that? What do you expect would happen if you had 5 more minutes? You just give people something that's aspirational, and it's amazing the difference it makes. And then they're kinder to themselves too, and proud of themselves.
I really love that. Actually, I'm going to try that. And it makes me think, like, when you're going to say, clean out your closet, which often we can procrastinate on doing. And sometimes I'll say, okay, just clean out this one small area. You do that, there's no way you're leaving your closet. You're like, now I'm gutting everything out. And I think it just gets your brain, it allows the toe to tap the water. And then it's like, you know what? It's not that cold. I'm going to put 2 feet in. Now I can put more in. And it just eases you into it versus this shock of, I need to spend 3 hours cleaning my house. It's no, I'm going to just focus on this small area. And that's what I hear with what you're talking about is just 5 minutes on your project. And then it's like your brain says, I can handle 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Even if your brain's saying, I'm not going to get much done, I can handle it is really important. Yes. Then you do that. And then you say, ooh, I just had a win. I think I'll do 5 more.
And sometimes the having the reset come back up again is a really nice reminder that you are being productive. Time is going by, but you're being productive. That I think is an important part of it, even beyond being self-compassionate, is that it's like having a tiny goal that you can easily achieve that you didn't think you were going to be able to achieve at all when you first got started.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, such good stuff. I'm curious on your book. You kind of got me hooked on the book that you're procrastinating writing. What if you act now? So with that book, which you have not yet written, what would you say and maybe you've already identified them. If you haven't identified them yet, what would you say would probably be, let's say, 3 to 5 key chapters in there, just chapter titles? What if you act now? What would those be?
Well, actually, it was just if you act now.
Oh, if you now.
It wasn't even what if you act now, but that was interesting. I had not thought about that, so I'll have to think about it that way. I don't know. I imagine what I would do is that some of the chapters would be solution chapters. Right I would take something that I use with clients like mindfulness. There are ways of using it that are not just to not just to teach you meditation, or there are just many good things to do with it instead. So I take research and I turn research into very practical interventions that sort of are, sometimes they're like a creative twist on the way the research was done. So mindfulness, there's lots of different research that looks at how it changes your brain. One of the great things is that it helps improve your attention span if you practice different kinds of mindfulness. So that would be one of the chapters, would definitely be about that. Another one would be looking at character traits like self-regulation. People who have high self-regulation aren't necessarily going to be the people who don't ever procrastinate. They might be like too self-regulated and get themselves so rigid that they can't do anything. Yeah. And then you have people who have very low self-regulation who recognize that it's really hard for them to get something done without high structure, and they impose structure on themselves. So I would have a chapter probably about that.
Yeah.
That's only 2 chapters. I got to figure out what more of them are going to be. But so there would be the solution focused chapters. I think there would also be some definition areas, and I would probably interview people who think of themselves as chronic procrastinators, so people could have a range of the way they see procrastination in the world and maybe see procrastination in themselves. Mm-hmm. That's at least 5 chapters there.
Yeah, I love it. I have a feeling our listeners are thinking, please, please, please sit down for 5 minutes each day and get this book. Now, it's interesting, the self-regulation one. I had heard, I don't know if this is accurate, but self-regulation for most people in the US tends to be one of the lower character strengths. And I could see where perfectionism and can really, even if you're high on self-regulation, and if there's any perfectionist qualities that you embody, that might stifle you sometimes because you want it to be done so well that you don't end up starting.
Okay, so I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to say that perfectionism is a symptom. I'm going to say that's not the problem. Perfectionism is something that you are, if you want to make it perfect, chances are that's being driven underneath that by anxiety. Like performance anxiety, a symptom of that is a need for perfection. So one of the other things that is going to have to put in that book is, we spend a lot of time sort of diagnosing other people and their problems. And a lot of times we're really wrong about what's driving their bus. And I think it's because I personally work with people who have learning, attention, and executive function difficulties. That trifecta, that's my sweet spot for working with people. And I would say that people either in that area, they also are sort of the polar opposites, like I was talking about before, with self-regulation. These people, either they don't do something or they do it and do it and do it and do it. And they're like, they can't give it up until it's perfect. And that means nothing else gets done. So learning how to self-regulate is really very important. And you have to learn how to self-regulate in context-specific ways. It's not enough to just become a self-regulated person.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and what I'm hearing in there, it all goes back to what's the emotion underneath this?
Yes.
That's propelling this forward, and checking in with yourself. What am I feeling in this moment? And probably, to be able to label it. I know Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, is great with being able to label certain feelings that we have and emotions, but being really clear on what am I feeling, what's playing out here. So, and it could be anxiety, performance anxiety, what have you. Yeah.
Well,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say another thing that I like about thinking about what the different emotions are is you can kind of work backwards from what you feel driven to do to figure out how you're feeling. Because sometimes we don't really know how we feel. Sometimes we think that we're feeling angry about something, but we're really feeling sad. So I think we can label things and be really wrong about that. But if we look at what our action tendency is, sometimes that helps us out a little bit more. So that's something else that's an important thing that'll have to go in that book when I write it one day.
Yeah, this is why I'm asking you this, because I thought that might inspire you to get the book going. So once you know the content, now we've got it all laid out for you. Before we play 1, 2, 3, which I always love to end with my guests, have you seen the TED Talk by Tim Urban on procrastination?
Yes.
That's one of my
It's interesting because he describes himself personally as a chronic procrastinator.
Exactly.
Right. And I think it's interesting when you have people who identify as a procrastinator. I'm going to say that he's only one kind of procrastinator, because all procrastinators procrastinate in their own unique ways. Just like who was it? Tolstoy, like every family is dysfunctional in its own way or whatever. But, I'm going to say that not everybody is going to respond to the same things. We have some people who love the Pomodoro technique. I find that people I work with, if they have to do something for 25 minutes, that's not good enough. That's why I only do 5, right? Yeah. Because they're just not going to get started if they have to do something for 25 minutes. It might work later, but then it's harder to get restarted if they take a break for 5 minutes. Most people I've only done it for 40 years. I'm not a chronic procrastinator. And in my 40 years, I have found that it's a lot easier to get people to do something if they feel like they can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. And what I love hearing you say, which we always need to remind ourselves, is we're all different. Every single brain is different. What's going to motivate us is going to be different. So really checking in with yourself and not having this blanket statement. So this is how you deal with procrastination, or this is what a procrastinator looks like. It looks different on all of us. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I have one more thing before you ask me my 3 questions. Earlier in the week, I was talking with a client who was really angry with somebody who was their direct report, and the manager said, "I feel like I just need to make things really painful to get this person to do their job." And of course, this makes me wince when I hear this, but oftentimes this is what people think, that if I make it painful, it'll be motivating for somebody. And in the short term, that can be true. So I just want to let people know that if you do something that seems painful or punitive, and it seems to be getting you an immediate result, that is a true result that you're seeing, but it's not sustainable. So it's worth being patient and having people learn sustainable approaches to managing procrastination instead of just like getting a job done quickly, because ultimately that's painful and not going to be something that's going to make somebody be happy and engaged, the things you really want.
Yeah. Long-term rewards versus that short-term. And It goes back to self-regulation and to some extent, right? And being patient. So, yeah, with yourself and others.
Yes. With
which circles us back to self-compassion and managing procrastination through that lens. All right. So 1, 2, 3, what is one mindset shift that you hope that our listeners will take away?
That procrastination is emotional. It's not about time management. That'd be my number one.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that because that is a complete mindset shift from what we've been told for so long from whoever they are, who have told
Whoever
us.
they are. Yeah.
Number 2, what are 2 ideas or facts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
So 2, one that goes along with the procrastination is emotional. It's not a time management problem. I would say procrastination is not a character flaw. It's not something that's wrong with you. And then the second thing would be that mindfulness is not just for yoga. You can use it for lots of other things. And managing procrastination is one of those.
Yes. And it definitely, going back to your first point, procrastination, that's the reason we're having this, because it is so prevalent across the leaders who we coach. It doesn't matter. You could be a CEO or you could be brand new in your career. You could be a student. This is something that it's part of the human journey, is sometimes procrastinating.
Yes.
So even when we know better or we think differently. So 3 actions that are plug and play actions that are really low hanging fruit that our listeners can take with them. Of course, I'm hoping that 5-minute idea is one of them, but I don't know.
Oh, well, that could be. So I'm going to roll that into one of the other things I was thinking of. So the first one I would say is structure. So structure could be a lot of different things. The 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, that's definitely a way of structuring time that's helps you become much more time aware. So I would say definitely structure is important. And then the next one I would say is that it's really important to have a self-advocate experimental mindset. So you did this when you worked with your colleague. You were going to write. Your colleague was going to write. You had a self-advocate because if you needed to ask for help, you had somebody right there, and your colleague could do likewise. It could be a lot of things. It could be anytime you can ask somebody for help, not to do it for you, but for the kind of help that you need in order to be able to be successful. So a coach can be somebody you go to for, as a self-advocate. It could be lots of things, but that's a really important thing, is to know when to ask for help and to be open and accepting of that help when it comes your way. As long as it's, not pointing out all your flaws, because it's not a character flaw.
Yes.
Back to the first one. Okay. And then what? That was 2.
2.
2. I have,
give a third one.
Structure, self-advocacy. And the other one is the importance of time awareness versus time management. We're not trying to manage time. We're trying to be aware of time. Some people are not naturally good at knowing that time has elapsed. And, of course, anybody who gets to a certain age, you say, oh, I can't believe how fast time is going by. Whereas if you're like, 5 years old, you're like, how much longer do I have to wait? So time awareness is really important. That some things take a long time, and that is part of how it is. When you have something that takes a long time, breaking it up into smaller bits is a good idea. When you have things that are short, focused things, then you need to be aware that you have a short amount of time, and then you change your energy to match the amount of time that you have.
I like that, because it gets back to that energy management, which is so essential. Yeah. All right. So we always like to think about what's in it for me. So if you could have one concluding sentence on what's possible when somebody is self-compassionate around procrastinating.
When you are self-compassionate around procrastinating, you don't need to blame yourself for being less than, or you don't need to suggest that you're never going to be able to turn things around or never be able to get better. I think even just those 2 things, that you are capable, that you are whole, that you are able to reach out for help and support, and that things can be better in a way that you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Sherry Fisher, thank you. I loved getting to be with you today. And our next conversation will be on your book, If You Act Now.
I don't know. That might be a very long time until we chat again. But thank you for your enthusiasm. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.